All right, ladies, this is your test review podcast for chapter 9 and 10 in our textbook, which is this Friday. It will be on the art of the Etruscans and of the ancient Romans. So I'm going to quickly go through chapter 9 and touch on some important material, but this is just a reminder for you that you should absolutely be reading the textbook, go through and read about all the images in the image set, play the Jeopardy, which is on Canvas under modules, review your notes, go through your worksheets, because sometimes I'll pull questions from the worksheets. I'll pull some questions from your quiz, and then obviously go through the PowerPoints to kind of refresh your memory, and pay special attention to the statements that I've bolded and underlined, because sometimes I will put that information in your test as well. Okay, so quickly, let's go through Etruscan art. Just to remind you, time period is roughly the 10th through the 6th centuries. The height of the Etruscan Empire is roughly the 7th through the 6th centuries. And we're in central Italy around modern-day Tuscany. And these are just some important points that I put together for you, so you should be familiar with this information. The big things that I really wanted you to take away from chapter 9 were that the Etruscans excelled in several technologies, but mainly in the field of metalworking. So you see a lot of bronze sculptures, a lot of gold jewelry. We looked at the golden fibula with the orientalizing lions on it. So they were really very, very good metal workers. They also excelled in ceramics. So we see a lot of ceramic sculpture, particularly terracotta sculpture. Remember that reddish colored clay. And another thing they were really known for was the role of women in Etruscan society. They were pretty much equal to men, close to equal to men, and their naturalistic funerary portraiture. And we'll look at it in just a minute, but remember the reclining couple on the sarcophagus, how they were sort of lying together in a very intimate, relaxed pose. Something like that had really never been seen before, and frankly shocked, other cultures who came in contact with it. So those are really the two big themes that I want you to pull away or take away from chapter 9. Okay, and we looked at this in class. We talked about this temple for a while, and you also had to write about it. So think about the differences and the similarities that we discussed between Etruscan temples and Roman temples. Think about material, think about the layout of the temple in general, think about statuary. Where would the statuary in a Roman temple be placed? Where is it placed here? Why are we just looking at a model of an Etruscan temple right now? So think about all of those things, because you may have to recall that. And then we looked more closely at one of the temple statuary, this Apollo from the roof of the Portinaccio temple in Veii, Italy. And this is actually one of the required works from the College Board. I should have bolded and underlined the caption for you, but this is a required image. So this is about life size, and this would have been on the top of one of those Etruscan temples. Think about his pose, think about how he's similar to archaic Greek statuary, but also how is he different from archaic Greek statuary. You see the archaic smile, the long braided hair that we saw in archaic Korai, but he has a lot more motion, right? His arms are outstretched, he's sort of striding forward. So there are some differences there as well. And also, just to kind of refresh your memory, this is also a required image from the College Board. This is the sarcophagus with the reclining couple from Cerveteri in Italy. And again, painted terracotta, that reddish colored clay. And just try to recall our discussion about this. Mainly the fact that this is a very unique pose that never really was not seen before in the history of art. Quickly, I want to touch on some important points from chapter 10 on ancient Rome. So the time period here is roughly the 8th century BCE and disintegrating around the 5th century CE. Okay, so notice we're jumping from before Christ to the Common Era. And then think about the themes that I brought up with you. A lot of political propaganda going on. And how so? Well, we looked at some sculptures of Roman emperors. We didn't get to the Roman arches. I'll try to show you at least one today. But the purpose in me showing you all of those is to reinforce that idea of political propaganda. These sculptures and these Roman arches would have been placed all around the city of Rome. They would have been very visible. The Roman emperors wanted the people of the Roman Empire to know what they look like or think they know what they look like. They wanted this image of power and authority to be very visible, not only to the Roman Empire, but to the rest of the world, which is also why they erected things like the Colosseum and the Pantheon and the Circus Maximus and these huge structures, not only to please the people of Rome, but to make a statement to the rest of the world. Ideas for you. You should be familiar with this information, but you just also want to keep in mind that the Romans contributed a lot to the world of art. And really their two biggest contributions were portraiture and architecture. What do we mean by that? Well, portraiture. Why was portraiture important? If you remember me showing you the reliefs from the Arapacis Augustae, we also looked at the head of the Roman patrician. The Romans actually depicted most people as they actually looked, okay? Whereas the Greeks pretty much idealized for the most part, okay? They were interested in the beauty of the human body, and idealization was very, very popular in Greek sculpture, whereas in Rome, you know, you wanted your future generations to remember you, to remember what you looked like. So you see a lot of those Roman busts, okay? Remember the Roman busts that were kept inside the Roman homes in the cupboards and were actually paraded around at funerals, kind of weird, but that is what was important to a Roman citizen. So portraiture was important, and also obviously their contributions to architecture. They invented the arch, they invented concrete, they invented the vault. Okay, so remember, can you think of the difference between a barrel vault and a groin vault? That's something that you should know. Okay, so keep that in mind as we move forward. Head of the Roman patrician, done at about 75 to 50 BCE, made of marble. And this is what I mean. This is what I was talking about when I was talking about portraiture. But another important statement that I'm not sure that I made clear in class was that most Roman citizens who were wealthy enough to have portraits done of themselves got busts, which means it was pretty much just a portrait from the shoulders up, okay? Because these were really just kept in their homes, like I said. Whereas sculptures of Roman emperors like Marcus Aurelius or Constantine or Trajan, they would have likenesses of themselves sculpted, but they would have the whole body sculpted. Sometimes they were on horseback. They were most often wearing armor. Remember, we looked at the sculpture of Marcus Aurelius with the Cupid at his feet, symbolizing his divine status. So, and these sculptures would have been placed all around Rome. So I want you to remember the differences between just a portrait of a person who is wealthy or a politician or something like that, where compare that to a portrait of an emperor and how those two are different. Look briefly at the House of the Veti. So I would say be familiar with this, be familiar with the different parts of the Roman domus. And remember how I kind of described the inside of the domus, how the walls would have been covered with different types of wall painting, fresco wall painting. So review the 4 different styles of wall painting. Make sure you're familiar with those as well. And, you know, just, you don't have to know every single term, but I would definitely know the impluvium, the peristyle garden. Remember we talked about that. So just be familiar with that. Quite a bit of time talking about the Pantheon. You also had to read about the Pantheon for homework, so you should be very familiar with this building. You should be able to discuss some of the architectural features in here. So remember we talked about the dome. How were they able to create this 140 foot in diameter huge dome? How was that possible? It was the first time this has happened in art history. How did they make the dome light enough? How was the dome decorated? How was the inside of the Pantheon decorated? Who commissioned the Pantheon? You know, you should be very, very familiar with this building. So make sure you review that as well. So we didn't really get to the end of the chapter in class, unfortunately, so I had to skip over the sarcophagus of Junius Bassus, which you should know about. And I also didn't get to this image. This is called the Portrait of the Four Tetrarchs from Constantinople, early 4th century. And what happens in the 4th and 5th century in Rome is things start to decline. There's a lot of political unrest. There's a lot of upheaval, and emperors were very, very paranoid about being overthrown, being murdered. And if you remember that portrait of Caracalla that I showed you in class where he had that sort of suspicious look on his face, that really embodies the political state of the Roman Empire around this time. So this image right here is called the Four Tetrarchs, Portrait of the Four Tetrarchs, because what happened was leaders would sort of band together. So instead of one person ruling over the Roman Empire, they would have, in this case, four, which increased their chances of not being overthrown, not being murdered, and whatnot. But you can still see on their faces definitely this look of suspicion, this look of paranoia going on, which again just kind of shows the political unrest that was happening in Rome during this time. Okay, so that is what a tetrarch is. A tetrarch is when there are four rulers at one time. We also did not get to any of these arches. So there's a couple. There's the Arch of Trajan. There's the Arch of Constantine, and there's one other one that we didn't get to, but you want to kind of think of these arches as like a political billboard, basically. You know how we have gigantic billboards on the side of the road with ads and things like that. This is pretty much an ad for an emperor. And this is actually the largest of the three in our chapter, and we think this was actually a mishmash of arches from previous emperors that had been destroyed. So Constantine kind of borrowed, if you will, pieces of other emperors' arches and kind of slapped them on his own arch, which is kind of funny. So just take a look and kind of tell me what you see. You should see unfluted Corinthian columns, a lot of relief sculpture going on. And what's going on in the relief sculpture? Well, there are images of Constantine's conquests. There are images of him distributing largesse or money to the poor people of Rome. So it's really just kind of making him out to look like a great guy, okay, which is what, you know, really what these emperors wanted, is to gain the love and appreciation of the people of Rome. Constantine is also important because he is the emperor who legalizes Christianity in the Roman Empire. Prior to him, Christianity was outlawed. If you were found out to be a Christian, you were persecuted, you were thrown into the Colosseum, you were made a slave, so it was just, you know, not a good thing. But when he comes into power, he converts to Christianity and legalizes the religion. So that's why he's important. Another thing I wanted to throw in about Constantine is that his portrait was sort of a break with the past, because remember how I said most of the emperors of Rome were depicted mostly in a realistic way. Some of them were idealized, but not all of them. He is definitely depicted as a very youthful head of state, much like Augustus. Remember the portrait of Augustus that we looked at in class. So some of them were idealized, many of them were not. But what they do all have in common is that they wanted to convey this sense of power and authority. So that's really what you want to take away from that. And I'm going to end here with this portrait, another portrait, which as far as we know depicts what this person actually looked like. This was actually an encaustic painting, which would have been wax and pigment painted on wood. So this was actually a funerary portrait. And that's all the time I have, girls. So good luck studying, and I will see you on Friday.